Hello, everybody. Good morning to Sam. Angelica, to you.
Hello, everybody.
Good afternoon to Sam. Good evening to others. I would like to welcome all of you on the next Sofa Talk. Sofa Talk is a format that MRG is running since a while. I try to invite the most interesting person I can find all over the world to my virtual sofa. We sit together and we talk. The person is always woman with minority or indigenous background. And the person is able to share with us, on one hand, her personal story, on the other hand, a wider overview on some very important topic. Today, I have an honor and pleasure to have with me on my couch, on my sofa, Angelica Ricaurte from Colombia. Hello, Angelica. Can you hear me?
Hi, Anna. Yeah, it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for this invitation.
Thanks for being with us and getting up in the morning to join us to be able to be heard all over the world. We will still wait a little moment for others to join. I know that some people have delayed to join us watching, but we will start very, very shortly. I see on Facebook that people are saying hello to us. Dear watchers, if you, in any point of our conversation, have a question to Angelica, please feel free to write it there. I'm very happy to voice forward it later at the end of our meeting. Also, if you didn't understand something, if something is not clear, or if you have suggestions for us as MRG, how to do Sofa Talks better or who to invite next time, maybe you are a person, a woman somewhere out there in the world who would like to share your story, please let us know. I will be watching chat while talking with Angelica. Okay, let's start. Angelica, you are a human rights lawyer and activist. Putting those two things together, you are also a Fulbright fellow at the Pennsylvania State University, working on the topic of law, race, and equity. You are also a consultant for different NGOs. Between us, we are very lucky as MRG to have you in our circles. And I invited you today in this part of the year, not by accident. We are in the middle of May, and on the upcoming Sunday, this will be 21st of May, which is a very important day for Colombia. Could you tell us why?
Yeah, so this is an important historical moment in the history of Colombia because on 1851, it was abolished the slavery in Colombia. So throughout the Americas during the colonial periods and even several decades after the proclamation of the independence of Colombia, slavery was part of the social, the political, and the cultural structures. So seeing the contents and this in the colony, the indigenous people became a slave of the Spanish. They didn't have the right to access to, for example, the right to learn or the read and write, the right to property and so on. So the indigenous people undertook heavy agricultural work without receiving any kind of compensations, as was the case in the particularly the Pacific area. So with the decline of the indigenous population due to several issues, for example, disease and overexploitations, they resorted to bring in Africa, and especially people from West Africa who arrived in America, making trees for more than 2 months in horrible conditions. So this was between the 60s and the 80s centuries, and they were both like any kind of mercancies. So at the end of the 18th centuries, with the struggle for the independence of our country, Colombia, and in the name of the equality and human rights and the idea of the Enlightenment that strongly criticized the existence of slavery, speaking the Americas, we definitely accrued the important to abolish the slavery on our country. So I have to say that before Colombia gaining independence in 1810, enslaved people took important and crucial steps to rebel against their masters. So, for example, one notable example, it was originally, it was Bencos Piojo, which is an enslaved people from Guinea-Bissau, and he led a slave uprising at the beginning of the 17th century. So this rebellion led to the creation of palenques. For example, the Palenque of San Basilio, which is located close to Cartagena in the Atlantic coast of Colombia. The Spanish, because of that revelation, declared the people of Palenque of San Basilio the free people of America. So San Basilio de Palenque is the first free town for African American descendants, and these rebellions are an important milestone in the story of Colombia's struggle for freedom and equality. And the end of slavery in Colombia was finally officially declared on May 21 of 1851, with President Jose Hilario Lopez issued a decree abolishing the slavery through the country. So this decision, it was definitely a significant step forward in the struggle for human rights and equality in Colombia. So that is why May 21st is commemorated in Colombia as the day of Afro-Colombian culture. It served to a reminder, of the legacy of Afro-descendants and the ongoing struggle of the Afro-Colombian and Afro-descendants communities for racial justice and equality.
And when did it start to be celebration? How many years ago?
Yeah, this celebration have been celebrated annually since May of 2002, when it was established by law 725 of 2001. And this day was chosen to honor the 150th anniversary of the abolition of the slavery in Colombia. And this national day seeks to recognize the important, the rich culture and the contribution of the Afro-Colombian communities to all the Colombian societies. As you may know, Afro-Colombian communities face significant discrimination and marginalization and exclusion throughout the Colombian history. So this, the Afro-Colombian Day is definitely an important step toward recognizing and addressing this kind of injustice. It serves as a reminder, that we definitely have to combat discrimination and celebrate the contributions that Afro-Colombian make every day for our society.
Let us imagine such a day. What is happening on 21st of May in Colombia?
Well, definitely, for example, some social civil organizations such as the Afro-Colombian Process, the PCN, or for example, ILEX Acción Jurídica, which is another social civil organization, or for example, another organization in the Pacific Coast, in the Atlantic Coast, that maybe have less visibility, but they, try to, for example, put in particular dresses that Afro-Colombian people use or wear, or for example, they made a speech in terms of communication, where they present the demands in order to have in a country with racial justice, with equality, and so on. Other people just congregate in a place where they, for example, drink, particularly beaches, which is a traditional drink in the Pacific coast of Colombia, and they celebrate, because it's a day to commemorate us, to celebrate us, to see the importance of Afro-Colombian people, not only in our country, but in the world. So we have different culture. For example, it's not the same to talk about Afro-Caribbean in the Atlantic coast of Colombia, which is the place I was born. It's not the same to talk about people in the Pacific. So what I'm trying to say is that we have different kind of celebrate this. I particularly took a moment in my day to think about all the crucial moments that we have go through, but also the important struggles that we have. So it depends, but at the end, it's a way to commemorate us and to celebrate us.
And to celebrate the importance of Black population in Colombia. Is it an easy topic to work on, to focus on, to celebrate?
Well, it's not an easy topic. You know, for example, we have for the first time the first Black vice president, which is a woman of Colombia. And for example, she faced a lot of racism just because of the color of their skin. So recently, for example, they was just compared to an animal. You know what I mean? So when you realize that we still have face discrimination and systematic racism, you discover that it's not an easy topic. And mainly because the white and mestizo population in Colombia, but also in Latin America, is not prepared to talk about racism. Because when you say, okay, are you a racist person? They say, no, of course I'm not racist. I mean, I love Black people. My best friend is also a Black, you know, but this is not enough because they don't recognize that racism is a structural and is systemic, you know, a systemic problem. So when you realize that, you realize that you have to combat all the institutions' view about Black population. So it's not definitely an easy conversation, but I celebrate that we are making this kind of difficult conversations because at the end, to put the Black agenda, to say in some way, is the only way that we have to continue with our struggle.
Maybe we can give homework to everybody who is watching us, that on the 21st of May, you try to read a bit more about Colombia and the history and what means for the Black population in Colombia to celebrate this day and why is it so important. When I think about dates and the topic of racism and the topic of discrimination when it comes to Black people, of course, what comes to mind is the death of George Floyd in 2020. George Floyd, who was murdered by the police in the US. I'm wondering how this situation looked like from perspective of Colombia. Different countries, different nations perceived it differently and reacted differently. That was the beginning of big Black Lives Matter movement. In many places it woke up, in many places it just got strengthened. How it was in Colombia?
Yeah, so the death of George Floyd had definitely a significant impact on the anti-racism movement in not only Colombia, but in Latin America. So in the wake of Floyd killing, protests erupted across the region with demonstrations calling for an end to police brutality and particularly racial police brutality and systematic racism. So in Colombia, the Black Lives Matter movement gaining a momentum and a solidarity with the Afro-Colombian communities who have long been fighting for racial justice and equality. So the movement definitely sparked the George Floyd deaths also brought attention to the ongoing struggle of Afro-Colombian communities, but also indigenous communities in Latin America, because it highlights in some way the need for greater recognition and respect for the cultural heritage, for the land rights, and for the human rights. And as a result, the anti-racist movement in Latin America and Colombia gained increased visibility, with activism continuing to push for systemic change and for greater representation of marginalized populations. So, for example, talking particularly about police brutality. Today in Colombia, more than 20 organizations are part of the Roundtable for Police Reform. This is an idea that arose from the 2021 social outbreak in Colombia, which caused series of massive protests and evidence and police brutality, especially police brutality against people of Afro descent. Because this is important. When we talk about police brutality, we have to say clearly that the actions of the state have differential impact Afro descendants. So based on what happened in the United States, today the most forceful civil society organizations demands the rights of the people who protest. So some of these organizations, for example, as I mentioned, is Conferencia Nacional de Organizaciones Afrodescendientes, or ILEX Acción Jurídica, or the Black Community Process, the Proceso de Comunidades Negras. So having this kind of civil society organization help us to continue this process. So today in Colombia, we are in the middle of the police reform when we demand action that, for example, they don't employ particularly protocols to guarantee the life, particularly the life of people that are part of marginalized populations, for example, Afro-Colombian communities, but also people with different or sexual identity, like transgender people. So what I'm trying to say is that what occurred in the United States definitely marked our momentum in Colombia. But I also have to say that the anti-racist movement in the United States is not the same in Colombia or Latin America, because they are African Americans. We are African Americans, but we are African Americans from the global South. So when we understand that, we realize that we have a different approach to the life, that we have, for example, have been victims also of the armed conflict, that a lot of countries in Latin America have been suffered. We also have a different struggle in terms of access to health, to education, and to have, another kind of rights. That maybe in the United States, people have more access to these rights. So I'm trying to say that definitely they inspire us as a movement, as a continental movement. But also I'm trying to remark that our struggle is different because we are different, and recognizing our difference is the way we have to say we can learn, but we can also propose different actions to face these kind of problems.
I think those words are very true for a lot of continents, a lot of regions of the world. That it's so crucial to recognize those differences. I was wondering about you. You are a human rights lawyer and activist working on the topic of race. Why do you do it? How come this is your topic? How did it start? It didn't start in 2020. It started much earlier.
So yeah, I am a Colombian woman and a human rights lawyer. I'm working mainly with victims of the armed conflict in my country and Afro-Colombian human rights defenders. So when I talk about me, I don't like to talk about me, but when I do it, I like to separate the different categories of my identity just to problematize the way I locate myself in the world, So I have to begin naming my identities because naming the way I experience the world allow me to better understand the structural and the systematic racism. So I am a woman, which means that I have suffered discrimination due to my gender. I am from Colombia, which means that I've been victim of xenophobic comments, and particularly when studying in the United States, just because the fact that I am from a developing country or from the global south, that is the word I prefer to use. I am also Afro-Colombian, and especially Afro-Caribbean. And that means that somehow I have suffered discrimination because of the color of my skin. And I also victim of the armed conflict due to the kidnapping that suffered my father 20 years ago. So let me tell you that I'm not embarrassed of that. I'm absolutely proud of being all of that because it's the way these experiences have marked my life in some way and have largely defined who I am today. So I completely proud of my multiple identities. I'm completely proud to be a woman in Latin America fighting for racial justice and helping so many others to raise their voice. And I also completely respect the many Afro-Colombians who don't have the opportunities that I had, who don't have the opportunities to go to the university or to access to quality education, who are still living in context of violence and suffering from forced displacement or forced recruitment. And they have been victims, activists in their communities. So I also recognize the privilege of my biracial identity. We also have a little of Spain and our indigenous communities. So what I'm trying to say is that I definitely have been marked for that kind of identities who problematize the way I put in the word, but I also recognize the privilege to access to quality education and the privilege I have had in my life made me be more respectful to raise the voice of the communities that have been experienced the war in some ways that I don't experience. Yeah.
You might not like talking about yourself, but I like when you're talking about yourself because I think it gives us a completely different picture and perspective on all of this with your reflective division of your identities. And you said this important sentence that you are fine with all your sides, with all the things that you mentioned. Not everybody is, right? Some people have very different attitude towards their Black heritage, and I think it's, as you said, it's very important to think about your perspective, but also of the perspective of others, especially in the world when racism is all over the place everywhere, and we shouldn't hurt each other even more. How is the situation with racism doing in Latin America?
Yeah, so let me tell you something, and excuse me if I talk a little bit about Colombia, but I grew out in Sincelejo, in Sucre, which is a small town on the Caribbean coast of Colombia. And I was born into a very traditional family of the Caribbean coast. So let me provide you some context using the case of Colombia, but after that we can talk a little bit about the Afro-Latin context. So the internal armed conflict in Colombia began in 1960s. It's a war with different armed groups, such as the far-right paramilitary groups and the far-left guerrillas and the Colombian state. So the armed conflict in Colombia have been ongoing for over 60 years. I mean, 6 decades. Have been fueled by a complex different factors such as poverty, inequality, corruption, and drug trafficking. So in Sincelejo, the town I was born in, just 70 kilometers away from Montes de Maria region, which is the epicenter of the violence in Colombia during the beginning of the 21st century. So there in El Salado, in the beginning of this century, at least 150 members of the paramilitary groups killed around 100 of peasants. And the victims were subject to torture, beheadings, decapitations, and rapes, with some being massacred on a football field while others were killed in a church of the town. So witness says that the paramilitary used stones and woodens to kill the peasants, and they also drank alcohol while committing these atrocities. So keep in mind that it was in my region. So I grew out with terror, with sadness, where we naturalize and normalize the violence. And most of these victims were Afro-Colombians. More of them were indigenous communities. More of them were peasants. So when we talk about the war in my country, we definitely have to say that people from the capital of my country, which is Bogota, have not been affected in the same way that people from other small town or city, which are located in the coast, like the Pacific coast, or in the Atlantic coast. So for that reason, I'm trying to say that Afro-descendant people have been affected not only by the exclusion and discrimination that they face for the color of their skin, but they are also located in areas with high levels of violence, or where they have environmental issues such as illegal mining and so on. And this is also the case of Afro-descendants in Latin America, because they represent a significant portion of the population. They are around 130 million of people in Latin America, and they face like poverty, higher poverty rates compared with Blanco Mestizo population, and more than the 50 population in the Latin America and the Caribbean have living condition of poverty. They are more likely to face limited access to education, to healthcare, to employment opportunity, and they also are disproportionately affected by violence, as I mentioned. So it's not only to understand that we face discrimination because of the color of the skin, no, that we face discrimination in so many levels, because racism is structural, it's a systematic problem. Or for example, because of the pandemic of the COVID-19, Afro-descendant people in Latin America was more exposed to be killed by this tremendous issue, because they face higher levels or some particular conditions, health conditions. So, but these health conditions are in our bodies just because we don't have the same access to health as white mestizo population. So it's terrible to talk about that, but what I'm trying to say, I hope to be clear on that, is that we face different kind of discrimination that put ourselves in a particularly place where we face different barriers, So despite some progress in the recent years, discrimination continued to hinder the advance and inclusion of Afro-descendants in Latin America. They are often excluded from political decision-making processes and face limiting representation in government institutions. So I told with tremendous love about Francia Marquez, because it's our first vice president, but this is the second Black woman vice president in the Americas after Elsie Campbell in Costa Rica. I mean, when you think about that, it's sad. From one hand, we are really happy to have them in power, but in some way, remind you that we have to make definitely and crucial steps in order to more people that are part of minority populations are in the power. It's a reminder that we have to make better steps and better policies to ensure that ethnic minority groups are represented in position of powers. So African American in Latin America and the Caribbean are also face land tenure issues, environmental degradation. They are disproportionately affected for that kind of environmental degradation, and they are often pushed into the most vulnerable areas of the country, such as areas with poor infrastructure, high crime rates, and also Afro-descendants in Latin America continue to face significant challenges in securing their human rights and achieving social and economic justice. In the case of my country, but it's also the case of Brazil, Ecuador, and some countries in the Caribbean. For example, after the peace agreement that we signed with the Colombian government in the 2016, more than 900 people, human rights defenders, have been killed. And most of them are part of ethnic community, both indigenous community and Afro-Colombian communities. So it's terrible to say that human rights defenders have been killed. Colombia is also one of the world in the countries that kill more environmental activists. And more of the environmental activists are Afro descendants. To put that in consideration, to say that we have higher level of crimes, that we have a problem of systematic assassination of social leader, we have to complete the sentence. We have to say Afro-descendant people that are human rights defenders have been killed, because that puts you in some problematic, which is additional, is that Afro-descendant communities and indigenous communities have been victims of a kind of genocide, so definitely we have to say that. I say that very clearly because it's the way to put that in consideration and to talk about this problematic.
It is very important that you are pointing out all these connections between all those topics, because for a person coming from more privileged place, it is not clear how to connect the land grabbings, displacement, illegal mining, climate topics with still again and again discrimination. But I wanted to ask, you already started to talk about her, about Francia Marquez, about this political representation, how important it is. I know what you said, it's crazy that it's only the second Black woman on a position like this, but maybe this is the start. What does it mean for women, for young women, to see Francia on such a position?
Yeah, Francia Marquez is a prominent Afro-Colombian social leader and environmental activist who have been fighting for the rights of Afro-Colombian communities for so many years. She is known for her work in defending the land and the human rights of Afro-Colombian and indigenous communities in the face of corporate and government interests. So Marquez's appointment as Vice President of Colombia definitely represents a significant step toward greater representation and recognition for excluded population or marginalized communities in the country, such as Afro-descendants communities. So I think it will signal a commitment to addressing the historical injustice and the racism and the discrimination faced for Afro-descendants and indigenous communities, as well as is a remark of the recognition of their importance in shaping the future of the country. So I think that the position of Francia Marquez doesn't have an implication for Colombia, but have broader implications for the regions, because highlight the importance of representation and leadership of excluded populations in shaping policy and decisions that affect their life. So it will serve definitely, I see that like an example and an inspiration for other countries in the Latin America and the Caribbean to follow this step and prioritize the voice and the needs of historical marginalized communities. Because what it was occurring in the past, for example, that we have the Minister of Culture. So this is the position in the past that Afro-Colombian women occupy in high positions of power. But to me, that is a little problematic, because when we put something like Minister of Cultures, to me in some way is to speak the exoticization of Afro-Colombian. It's
Yes,
like
and she should put the
Afro-
dress, the traditional dress, right?
exactly. So, oh, it's very important to have the Minister of Culture. You wear dresses of Afro-Colombian. You say that Afro-Colombian legacy is important. But it seems to me that they consider that Afro-Colombian doesn't have something more to offer, you know? So this is the first time that occurred something different because the vice president in our country is a symbolic position of power. Actually, it's the second most important position of power in a country. So when that occurs, is the way to say this is Francia Marquez. She has been an environmental activist for so many years. So she also have a recent visit to Africa, where they have this kind of cooperation south-south, you know. So they are trying to put in the exterior agenda the way that Colombia have something to offer in terms of reconciliation, in terms of the peace process that we are developing right now. So it's not just that Francia America is a Black woman that represents the way they're done, the way they move, the way we talk, but also that we have something to say about peace building, about racial justice, about environmental issues, you know? So it's the way to recognize that we have definitely contributions that have been taken into account by the white mestizo population. But also, I have to say with sadness that it's unfortunately that today our vice president faced harsh criticisms and teasing at her condition as an Afro-Colombian. So as I mentioned like a few minutes ago, she's constantly compared to animals. I mean, it's ridiculous, but this is what is happening in Colombia. And she's criticized for taking a helicopter for security reasons, as if Black people in high position of power should explain why they deserve a special protection or something
But
like
when
that.
others have it just like this, right?
Exactly. In the past, white mestizo population all the time use helicopter to go to Colombia, to Africa. It's the only way we have to do that, you know? So it's really really funny and really sad to think about that, because in the past nobody asked why mestizo population, for example, do that particular thing. But when Francia Marquez did that, oh my God, it's a crisis in Colombia. But the crisis, the real crisis, is that we are facing a structural racism, and that the white mestizo population in position of power doesn't like that Afro-descendant women having the power, because they consider it still like inferior, and like we don't have the enough mind to think about difficult topics. So this is not exclusive for Colombia. This is happening in all the region, in all the Americas, in all the world, because racism is a structure, as I mentioned. Racism is a very structural problem. So also, when we talk about that, I talk from my Colombian perspective, from my Afro-Colombian perspective, but let me tell you that understand racism as a structural and a worldwide problem make you that you have to be very aware about what you are doing in your life, you know, about how you conceive problem. And if you allow me to do that, I want to read a very powerful sentence from Hebron Kendi, which is an Afro-descendant professor in the United States. And
Of
he
course.
said that, okay, I see myself culturally and historically and politically in Blackness, in being an African American, an African, a member of the forced and unforced African diaspora. I see myself historically and politically as a person of color, as a member of the global South, as a close ally of Latin, Asia, Middle Eastern and Native people and all the world degraded peoples from the Roma and Jews of Europe to Aboriginal of Australia, to the stateless Palestinians and Kurds in the Middle East, to the white people battered for their religion, class, gender, transgender identity, ethnicity, sexuality, body size, age, and disability. The gift of seeing myself as a Black instead of being colorblind is that it allowed me to clearly see myself historically and politically as being an anti-racist, as a member of the interracial body striving to accept and equate and empower racial difference of all kinds. And this is powerful because it's not only to say, I am not racist. The struggle, I mean, what we have to say is that we should be anti-racist. And to be an anti-racist means that maybe I am part of the Black mestizo population, but I contribute actively and possibly to ensure that the Black population and others historically marginalized population have a voice, and I allow that to raise the voice of that people.
I wanted to ask you at the end, what should we be doing to make the situation better? But you just answered this question with this amazing quote. Yes, it's not enough to be not racist. We have to do more. We all have to do more. So I will just finish with what I started. 21st of May, very important day. What would be your dream in, let's say, 5 or 10 years in Colombia? How this day would look like? Or maybe there wouldn't be a need to celebrate it anymore?
Mm-hmm. And I think that we should continue to celebrate our day. You know what? Because naming and saying that we are victim of racism allow us to say that there is a problem. Because some people have been saying, no, we don't have to talk about race. We don't have to talk about, it's a no to say that we all are equals, that we all are rights. So in consequence, we don't have to celebrate that days because that is a kind of discrimination, you know? And this is an assimilationist idea, as the person who wrote this book, who is called How to Be, okay, it's blur, How to Be an Anti-Racist. So it's not enough, you know, to say we are equals. We shouldn't be talk about racism because we are equals and we all respect human rights. So the crucial thing is to understand is that we should talk about racism. We should name that we are Blacks. Not because Black is beautiful, no. It's because we are Black and we suffer the different facts that discriminate, you know? So I think that we should continue to celebrate our day. Just a reminder for us of our own struggle, but a reminder for the white and mestizo population that you should be continue to help us in our own struggle, that you should continue to help us to raise their voice or marginalized people. I don't know, but in maybe 10 or 20 years, the world will be different as it was in 5 or 10 years in the past. I really confident about the future because we are talking right now about ethnic groups, about Afro descendants. But we can talk about the struggle of indigenous people. We can talk about the struggle of women. We can talk about the struggle of people with sexual diversity, identity of LGBT community. So what I'm trying to say is that we have different struggles because of our ethnicity, because of our gender, because of our class, because of our religious belief. We have definitely different struggles. And what that means is that we have a step to understand the diversity and the inclusion we mean. To me, inclusion is beautiful. To me, it's really powerful and interesting to talk with a white mestizo and indigenous population, a people that is from a class that is different to me, because that is allowed to recognize that we have different perspectives around the world, you know. And to me, we're really happy to join, for example, a celebration to commemorate the struggle on the indigenous community. I look forward to join this kind of things, as I look forward to join the struggle in Palestine, as I look forward to join the struggle with the Tunisians that are being victims of discrimination. It's not, we are talking right now about Latin America and the Caribbean, but what I'm trying to say is that we have to tell that the world is different, that we have struggles of so many kinds, you know, and that we have to be prepared and to be that kind of awareness to understand that we are not, that we are, that we are human beings, that we have more empathic with people that is just not like me, but have also greater contribution to do to this world. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
And having experts and speakers like you taking part in meetings like this makes absolutely sense. Thank you so much for all your reflections and our giving us directions for the future. Angelica Ricaurte was with us. Thank you. It gave me a lot of motivation, a lot of information. Thank you so much for your time today.
No, thank you to you, Hannah, for having me here. And it was a pleasure just to have this conversation.
Let's go on. And homework for Sunday, everybody reading more about 21st May in Colombia. Thank you.